Well, joining us now here on the program, pleased to have with us Dr. Oliver Peoples. He is the CEO of Yield 10. We're going to be talking a little bit about biofuels and Camelina here on the show today. And Dr. Peoples, first off, great to have you with us on the program. How are you, sir?
I'm great, Jesse. Great to be here. So nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, thank you for the time. And let's jump in. And I think just to start, can you give us a little background on Yield 10? What is it that you guys do as a company? You guys have a lot of development of Camelina for biofuels, as I understand it. Can you give us a little bit of a background just on the company overall?
Yeah, so Yield 10 obviously is a company that's been around as Yield 10 since 2017. Before that, we were a company called Metabolics, but we rebranded as Yield 10 in 2017, January, basically, to really focus on crop innovation. Looking at using Camelina, the oilseed, as a platform crop, both for discovery of new genetic traits to improve the yield, the oil content, the productivity of crops in general, but also as a platform crop for producing sustainable products.
Well, thinking about sustainable products, and you mentioned Camelina, and that's what I want to focus in on a little bit here, because obviously we've seen this surge in biofuels and this talk of, using sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel and so many different aspects here and avenues under the biofuels umbrella. What makes Camelina an attractive crop to use for biofuels, Dr. Peoples?
Well, first of all, it's not a major food crop in North America. I mean, that's obviously one major thing. I think the other two key factors is it's a very good oil seed already. It's obviously very undeveloped by comparison to soybean and canola. It simply hasn't received the same level of attention as those crops, and it doesn't have that 70 years of development work that's gone into those two. But it has tremendous potential. We've seen yields anywhere from 1,000 pounds an acre up to 3,000 or 4,000 pounds an acre. So it's got tremendous yield potential, but it's largely undeveloped. Although there are some early varieties, including varieties that we have. But the key attributes of it are, number one, it's a very robust and hardy little plant. It's already got good agronomics. It was obviously studied and developed extensively back in the mid 2000s, obviously targeting biodiesel, but that sort of fizzled out. And what we've seen is that essentially it's a very good fit in the Pacific Northwest because it has a much shorter growing cycle. It seems to require a lot less water than canola, for example. Obviously, water is a big issue, right? And you worry about land, you worry about water. Well, guess what? Those are pretty important things, and so that's a pretty big issue. And then the second thing is it's got this relatively short growing cycle, and in winter varieties of Camelina, the concept of double cropping or really cropping with soybean and corn becomes very, very attractive, and we think ultimately that's where the big play is.
Well, thinking about Camelina, sustainable aviation fuel is a hot topic right now, and I know there's been a lot of talk. The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Act here, the Biden administration wanting to see 3 billion gallons of sustainable SAF by 2030. So, talk about that a little bit. What do you think that impact of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Act could be on the agricultural sector, the biofuels market, and how could Camelina play a role there?
Yeah, so let's kind of take it from a very high level, and maybe let's start off actually not with SAF, but or SAF is what it's sort of the acronym for it these days. But let's start off with renewable diesel. So I think there's somewhere around 6 billion gallons of renewable diesel either has been built and is operating. For example, our partner Marathon has a facility operating in North Dakota in Dixon. And then you have another one that they're partnered with Neste in basically California. I think jointly that's probably 700 million gallons per year of renewable fuel. And obviously there's many more companies involved in this. But if you look at 6 billion gallons, you ask, well, what amount of vegetable oil would be required to serve that additional demand? And you sort of take a look at soybean, which is the biggest oilseed crop, outside of palm oil, which you can't really grow here. And you sort of look at converting all of that into basically biofuel feedstock. It'd be the entire acreage. I mean, it's the entire acreage of soy would need to be used for biofuels. Well, we've got to eat. Pretty simple. And there are already existing markets for soybean. And then you sort of say, well, we'll just get more land. Well, that's another finite issue, right? There's another limitation. In fact, if you look at arable land in North America, just from infrastructure growth,
Yeah.
I think the last 20 years we dropped by 20 million acres. And so that's a trajectory that's probably not going to change given the population growth. And so then you look at, well, if I can't get more land, how do I get more out of the land I already have, right? And that's where the cover cropping comes in. So the way to think about it is I harvest my corn in the fall, I plant winter Camelina, and then I harvest my winter Camelina in the late spring, and I plant my soybeans or some combination of that kind of impact. And then you look at the math and you say, so, does this add up? Is it meaningful? And so, you can take it and sort of say, well, there's about 180 million acres of soy, corn combined. And this is outside of the other areas that are very suitable for Camelina, but there's another large acreage potential. But just take the corn and soy. And you say, well, let's cover crop that with oilseed crops. And let's just do 25% of the acres in Camelina. And it's about 44 million acres, which make it the third largest crop in North America. And of course, you look at what farmers are doing already in terms of cover cropping. I mean, the growth in cover cropping is increasing. And they're doing that because obviously there's incentives for it, number one. Number two, farmers are very well aware that their land is their most important asset. And obviously the quality of that land, the organic carbon content in that land, these are all really important factors. Avoiding wind erosion, water erosion, all of these types of things. And so farmers are doing this anyway because of those environmental attributes and because it benefits their core asset, the land. But they're not making money at it, they're losing money. And so with a winter Camelina oilseed or another winter oilseed, I mean, there's other companies in this, that could be used as a second cash crop. And then you get the trifecta. You get increased grower revenue, you get the environmental benefits of cover cropping, you massively increase the availability of feedstock oil. And we shouldn't forget there's a growing global population. And there's a need to increase the amount of protein produced. And of course, the co-product from Camelina processing to produce the oil is, of course, a high quality protein meal. So it's, maybe I got the trifecta wrong. Maybe it's the quadruple. So, basically, it's a pretty solid story. There's a lot of work to do. It's still in its infancy. And that's why we really see partnering with growers as the way to do this properly.
Well, and you mentioned it, with SAF as well. That's the acronym for the Sustainable Aviation Fuels Act. And I know that if that is passed, the bill would employ the GREET model. We've heard quite a bit about that here in recent months in the biofuel industry. But just thinking about SAF in general, does it feel like that target by 2030, does that feel reasonable that the Biden administration has set?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable. I think if you look at, you got to ask the question, what's happening to transportation in general, right? And so the first thing you look at is you look at the auto sector. Now, I've been traveling around, obviously in farmland, and quite frankly, I'm not sure electrification of automobiles or trucks is going to really be the way to go there. But when you look at the densely populated coasts and you look at the potential here, you can see a massive shift to electrification, and it's happening. I mean, there's a reason Tesla's so damn successful. And so it's happening, and it's going to continue to happen, and it's going to expand. And pretty much all of the major auto companies are now involved in that. Trucking's a little different. Obviously, you get into, I got to carry an awful lot of weight in these trucks. And so it's still very limited in terms of the potential of that for trucking. Maybe there are other solutions. So that's really why renewable diesel is a pretty good option for the interim. That may continue, it may not. But then you look at flying airplanes and you think about, I'm going to fly this thing from, Chicago all the way to Hong Kong or London or whatever. And it's going to be a long time before we have a battery or some other technology that I'll be willing to step onto and, sit down and to fly across the ocean. And so, aviation is the big problem, I think, for the future. And, and as articulated in that bill, aviation is about 11% of emissions and of carbon emissions in North America. It's a pretty big contributor.
Well, Dr. Peoples, appreciate the time. Before we let you go, any final thoughts you'd want to share with us just about the growth of Camelina, anything that Yield 10 is working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of looked at this and sort of, we've seen some of the false starts in the past. And I would say the big watch out is companies and it's particularly prevalent with the big fuel companies, the Exxons and all these. They want to go out and plant hundreds of thousands of acres of crops that are perhaps not quite ready for prime time. And so Yield 10 is taking a more cautious approach. We're sort of feel it's best to partner with the growers. It's best to engage them in a conversation, make sure they understand what they're getting into, make sure that they understand it's early days for this, but also communicate what's in the pipeline, including advanced herbicide technology, so we can have seamless integration into their crop rotations. Because agriculture uses a lot of herbicides, and of course herbicides are different. And so some of them remain longer in the soil than others, and of course you've got to manage that, because if your land's got herbicides that Camelina or your other oilseed is sensitive to, well, guess what? You can't plant it after you've harvested your soybeans. So we are rapidly developing technology and taking it through the regulatory process for that. Our goal is a seamlessly integrated rotation option for growers that generates additional cash for them and generates tremendous value for Yield 10 and our shareholders.
Well, you can learn more online, yield10bio.com. Again, that's yield10bio.com. And with that, Dr. Oliver Peoples, CEO of Yield 10, thanks for joining us here today. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, Jesse. Greatly appreciate it.